The helicopter was ready. The weather wasn't. John was standing there, already knowing how this day was supposed to end, because he had studied it years later. He didn't come back to observe. He came back to do something that would cost him everything. Saving his idol wouldn't be clean. It wouldn't be heroic, and it wouldn't let him walk away. Some moments don't ask if you're willing. They ask what you're willing to lose. This is the butterfly effect. If you're still here, subscribe now. These stories don't repeat themselves. Every episode begins with a moment history ignored.
Stay with us until the end. Then tell us where you're watching from.
John sat on the edge of his couch in 2026, eyes fixed on the television. The screen showed archived footage from January 26, 2020. Fog rolling over the hills of Calabasas. A helicopter outlined in red on a digital map. The anchor said the date out loud. John already knew it. He had memorized it. That morning never passed for him. It replayed every year, always the same, always ending the same way. The report reconstructed the flight minute by minute. Low visibility, pressure to arrive, a climb that shouldn't have happened, a descent that came too late, spatial disorientation, impact, 9 fatalities confirmed. The names appeared one by one. Kobe Bryant. Then Diana, 20 years old, his daughter, sitting beside him. John felt his jaw tighten. The broadcast called it unavoidable. John knew exactly which decision had made it unavoidable. In 2020, John had been part of the analysis team. Not a commentator, not a witness, an engineer. He reviewed weather data, flight limits, pilot workload. No mechanical failure, no sudden malfunction, just a chain of acceptable risks stacking too high. He remembered pointing at the screen and saying, "The aircraft should never have left the ground." No one argued. The sentence simply moved on. The documentary showed crowds outside the arena, flowers, jerseys, silence. It did not show the inside of the investigation room, the charts, the simulations, the moment when prevention stopped being possible. John muted the TV. His hands rested on his knees, still like he was bracing for turbulence. He wasn't grieving fame. He was carrying the weight of knowing that waiting 30 minutes would have saved everyone on board. Paragraph 5. The room shifted without warning. The sound dulled. The edges softened. Time felt loose, like something unplugged. John stood instinctively. He had felt this sensation before, once, during severe spatial disorientation training. The moment when instruments stopped agreeing, when intuition failed. This felt similar, controlled, intentional. Then the presence settled, calm and heavy, as if it had always been there. Kronos did not explain himself. He didn't need to. John understood the offer before the words formed. One return, one moment. The day of the flight. No disguise, no authority. One chance to interfere before momentum took over. The original timeline would remain. This would be another branch. Balance would be enforced. Saving lives would not be free. Kronos made that clear by not defining the cost. John thought of Kobe, of Diana's name appearing after his on the screen, of fog thick enough to hide hills, but not consequences. He thought of how easy it would have been to stop the flight, and how impossible it had been after. He didn't ask if it would work. He asked if he would remember what he lost. Kronos did not answer. The television resumed, and time folded inward. The television kept playing, but the sound no longer mattered. John stood in the middle of his living room, heart racing, as the presence behind him settled fully. Kronos did not circle. He did not loom. He simply existed. John understood immediately that this was not a warning. It was an offer, the kind that appears only once, framed not by urgency, but by finality. Kronos spoke without emphasis. John would be given access to the same day, January 26, 2020, the same morning, the same conditions, not to observe, to interfere, to prevent the loss of the man he called his idol. The timeline would not be erased. It would be split. One branch would still carry the tragedy, another would not. Both would be real. There would be a cost. Kronos said this plainly. High, irreversible, not symbolic, not delayed. Balance would be enforced the moment the alteration held. Kronos did not describe punishment or reward. He described consequence. Time, he explained, does not tolerate intervention without exchange. Something would be taken in proportion to what was preserved. John asked only one question, not how, not when, not even if it would work. He asked whether the cost would fall on someone else. Kronos answered immediately, no, whatever was taken would be his, entirely. That was the rule. That was the condition. The room felt smaller then, as if the walls were listening. John did not sit back down. He remained standing, eyes fixed on the paused image of the helicopter on the screen, fog frozen mid-motion, a moment suspended before impact. He thought of Kobe, of Diana beside him, of how little time existed between routine and catastrophe. The answer arrived before the question finished forming. I accept. The words left John's mouth without hesitation, no negotiation, no request for clarity. He did not ask to know the price. Knowing would only introduce doubt. Kronos watched, unmoving. Acceptance, he observed, was always faster when the loss was personal. The presence around John tightened, as if time itself had acknowledged the decision. The room collapsed inward, not violently, precisely. The couch vanished beneath him. The light shifted. The weight of his body returned too quickly. Cold air filled his lungs. John opened his eyes to the sound of morning traffic. A different city, a different year. January 26, 2020. The day had begun again, and this time it carried his choice with it. John opened his eyes at exactly 6 a.m. The ceiling above him was familiar, but heavier than memory. The air smelled different, colder, real. His phone vibrated once on the nightstand. January 26th, 2020. He sat up slowly, heart pounding, grounding himself in the weight of the bed, the room, the morning. This wasn't vision or illusion. Time had placed him back inside the day. He checked the clock again. 6 hours and 47 minutes remained. He stood and moved with urgency, but not panic. Panic wastes time. He showered quickly, dressed without thinking, and opened his laptop before the coffee finished brewing. Weather reports filled the screen. Visibility levels, fog density, forecast updates that would be ignored later. He bookmarked everything, screenshots, PDFs, data that proved what instinct alone could not. The flight would be justified by confidence. John would need evidence sharp enough to cut through routine. Next came the aircraft. He accessed public records, maintenance logs, registration details. The helicopter's tail number triggered recognition immediately. He knew its systems. He knew what was vulnerable without being destructive. His mind mapped procedures automatically, how inspections worked, how delays were authorized, how faults escalated into grounding. The plan formed quickly, not as strategy, but as inevitability. This was what his career had trained him for, even if it had never named the purpose. John checked the time again. 6:42 a.m. Messages began arriving. News alerts, sports updates, normality intruding. He silenced them. The accident hadn't happened yet. In this version of the day, Kobe was still asleep. Diana was still packing. A future still existed because nothing had interrupted it. That knowledge tightened his chest. Preparation now carried moral weight. Every second he hesitated shortened the margin he had been given. He left the apartment with only what he needed, no tools that looked suspicious, no behavior that invited attention. He rehearsed the sequence in his head while driving. Arrival time, access points, who would be present. What could be altered quietly? He knew that once he acted, Reversal would not be possible. Kronos had not promised forgiveness for mistakes, only balance. John felt the pressure of that silence settle in. By 7:58 a.m., the fog had thickened. It hugged the ground the way risk often does, unnoticed until it suffocates. John parked and watched the area for several minutes, studying movement, listening to routine conversations. Everything looked ordinary. That was the danger. Catastrophe never announces itself. It hides inside mornings like this, waiting for permission disguised as confidence. John checked his watch one last time. 8:11 a.m., the plan was set. Not to save history, to interrupt it, to force delay where momentum ruled. He exhaled slowly and stepped forward, knowing the next actions would decide whether the day continued as remembered, or fractured into something entirely new. Kobe's flight had not begun yet, but time, John knew, had already started moving against him. John reached the aircraft area just after 8:20 a.m. Routine filled the space. Mechanics moved without urgency. Conversations stayed casual. He blended in by doing nothing that demanded attention. Systems fail most easily when no one expects failure. John waited for the smallest opening, the kind no one remembers later, then stepped closer to the helicopter with the calm precision of someone who belonged there. He worked quickly, hands steady despite the noise in his chest. The adjustment was minimal, not damage, not destruction. A disruption designed to force protocol, not suspicion. He knew exactly how inspections escalated, how minor irregularities triggered mandatory delays. When he stepped back, the aircraft looked unchanged. That was the point. The most effective interference leaves no visible trace. Minutes passed. A mechanic noticed the anomaly. A pause. A second check. John stayed still, listening. The fault was confirmed. The words he needed followed. "We can't fly this one." Relief surged through him, sharp and dangerous. The chain had been broken. Momentum slowed. For the first time that morning, history hesitated instead of accelerating. The relief lasted less than a minute. Another voice entered the conversation, calm, practical. "We'll use the backup." John felt the ground shift beneath him. A second helicopter, fully operational, already cleared, the system adapting instantly. His interference had worked and been neutralized. Delay had been absorbed, not enforced. The window narrowed again, faster than before. John realized the flaw in his plan. He had treated the problem as mechanical. It wasn't. The machine was replaceable. The schedule was not. Confidence filled the gap where caution should have lived. He watched as preparations resumed, unchanged in tone. The failure Kronos promised had arrived immediately, not as collapse, but as efficiency. He checked the time. 9:02 a.m. Less than 45 minutes remained. Sabotage would only escalate scrutiny now. Any further technical interference would expose him. The system had adjusted. The only remaining variable was human judgment. That realization carried weight. Human systems resist interruption differently. They do not follow protocol. They defend belief. John stepped away from the aircraft, heart pounding. The first attempt had bought seconds, nothing more. Saving this flight would not come from tools or access. It would require confrontation, visibility, risk. He understood then why Kronos never described the cost in advance. The real price wasn't punishment. It was standing in the open, knowing the next move could not be undone quietly.
John approached the pilot just after 9:05 a.m. Not abruptly, not urgently. He waited for a pause in conversation, then spoke as someone sharing information, not issuing warning.
He pointed to the fog levels, the forecast updates, the narrowing visibility corridor. The pilot listened politely, nodding once or twice. Experience radiated from him, confidence built over hundreds of flights. John recognized the posture immediately. Familiarity had already replaced caution. The pilot explained his reasoning calmly. Instruments were reliable. The route was known. Adjustments could be made mid-flight. Delays created pressure elsewhere. He didn't dismiss the weather, he reframed it. Risk became manageable through routine. John heard the subtext clearly. Nothing here was unprecedented enough to justify cancellation. The system wasn't reckless, it was comfortable. And comfort was far harder to interrupt than negligence. John tried again, this time more precise. He referenced spatial disorientation, human limitations in fog, how confidence erodes situational awareness. The pilot's expression tightened slightly. Not anger, boundary. This was no longer a discussion between peers. It was hierarchy asserting itself. John understood the line had been crossed. Technical argument alone would not change the outcome. Data was being filtered through belief. Paragraph 4. The conversation ended without conflict. The pilot thanked him and turned back to preparations. John stood still, feeling the weight of time press closer. He had spoken correctly. He had said everything that should have mattered. None of it landed. The window narrowed again. Less than 40 minutes remained. Kronos' warning echoed silently. Resistance would not look like refusal. It would look like procedure continuing unchanged. John watched the crew move with practiced efficiency. Headsets on, doors checked, schedules respected. This wasn't arrogance, it was momentum. He realized then that appealing to protocol would never work against routine. Systems don't collapse under logic. They collapse when belief is disrupted. And belief, John knew, did not yield to charts or forecasts. He checked the time. 9:18 a.m. The aircraft would be airborne soon. The plan had unraveled completely. Sabotage neutralized. Logic dismissed. Only one path remained, and it was the one he had avoided. He would have to step outside expertise and into something personal. That shift terrified him more than any technical failure ever had. John took a slow breath and turned away from the pilot. He knew where Kobe was. He knew who would listen if authority failed. The cost Kronos refused to name was no longer abstract. To stop this flight, John would have to expose himself completely. To doubt, to disbelief, to consequence. And for the first time that morning he understood that saving his idol would not look heroic at all. John found Kobe near the boarding area, calm, focused, already in motion. The fog framed everything in soft grey. John didn't announce himself. He stepped into Kobe's path and spoke his name once, clearly. That alone was enough to interrupt the rhythm. Kobe looked at him, surprised but attentive. Years of public life had trained him to read urgency. John didn't look like a fan. He looked like someone about to lose something. John spoke fast, but not wildly. He pointed past the aircraft toward the hills swallowed by fog. He talked about visibility, about margins collapsing, about how mornings like this lie. Kobe listened without smiling, without impatience. Diana stood close, watching John's hands tremble. John didn't claim authority. He didn't mention Kronos. He said only one thing that mattered. If you wait, nothing bad happens. Kobe asked a single question. Are you sure? John nodded before thinking. Certainty wasn't proof, but hesitation would have ended everything. He explained that the helicopter wasn't the issue. Time was, confidence was, routine was. Kobe glanced toward the pilot, then back to John. The noise of preparation continued around them. The world waited, balanced on a decision that felt too small to carry such weight. Diana touched Kobe's arm lightly, a small gesture. Not fear, awareness, Kobe noticed. He always did. John felt his throat tighten. He wasn't asking for trust. He was asking for delay. 30 minutes, an hour, enough for fog to lift, enough for the day to change. He didn't promise safety. He promised patience, the opposite of momentum. Kobe exhaled slowly. He looked at the helicopter again, then at the fog, then at his daughter. This wasn't about schedule anymore. It was about judgment. He nodded once, subtle, final. We'll wait. The words landed quietly, but the effect was immediate. The chain broke, routine cracked. Someone radioed the crew. Movement slowed. History lost its grip. John felt his legs weaken as the decision settled. He stepped back, suddenly unnecessary. Kobe thanked him without ceremony. No speech, no questions. Diana smiled, unsure why, but sensing relief. The fog remained thick, indifferent. But the day had shifted. The flight did not leave, and in that absence a future stayed intact. John turned away before anyone could ask more. He knew the balance hadn't been paid yet. Kronos had promised that. Saving lives did not close accounts. It opened them. As he walked out of the area, the clock read 9:47 a.m. The moment history remembered had passed, quietly, without impact, and John understood the cost would come next. John expected to wake in his apartment in 2026. Instead, he woke to fluorescent light and silence that pressed inward. The room was narrow, the bed was hard, his hands were already restrained when awareness returned. Memory arrived intact. The fog, the decision. Kobe walking away, Diana's hand on his arm. The mission had succeeded. That certainty remained. Everything else had shifted. Kronos had not lied. He had simply withheld the cost. The accusation was procedural, not emotional. Sabotage, endangerment, interference with aviation equipment. The words were delivered without volume, stripped of intent. Evidence was simple. His knowledge, his access, his timing. The damaged system discovered before takeoff. In another version of events, it would have been a footnote in an investigation. In this one, it was a charge. Saving a life had left a trail the system could not ignore. John did not resist. Resistance would imply regret. He answered questions calmly, carefully, aware that explanation would not absolve him. He could not mention time. He could not name Kronos. He could not explain motive without sounding delusional. The truth had no legal language. What remained was consequence. The machinery of justice moved forward, indifferent to outcomes it could not measure. News screens in the holding area played quietly. Sports headlines scrolled past. Kobe appeared briefly, smiling beside young players on a practice court. Alive, present, unbroken. Diana stood beside him, older now, confident, real. John looked away before the image could settle too deeply. He had not saved a symbol. He had preserved a future that would never know his name. Kronos did not appear. He never did at the moment of payment. John understood that absence as confirmation. The balance had been accepted. A life uninterrupted in exchange for a life constrained. Not equal, never equal, but coherent. The universe did not reward intention, it only accounted for deviation, and this was the weight assigned. As the cell door closed, John felt no anger, only clarity. He had acted with full awareness of uncertainty. He had chosen impact over safety. The cost was not unexpected, it was merely delayed. Time had kept its promise. The future he returned to was better for others, narrower for him. That was the exchange. John sat alone and asked himself the only question that mattered now, not whether it was fair, not whether it was worth it, but whether, given the same moment, the same fog, the same choice, he would do it again. The answer arrived without hesitation. Yes. And that answer, he understood, was the final consequence he would carry forever.
History remembers victories. It rarely remembers the cost of preventing them.
John saved a life by breaking a rule no one was meant to touch. The world moved on. Kobe lived. Diana grew older, and the future unfolded as if nothing had almost been lost. But someone paid for that silence. If you were standing where John stood, with minutes left, no authority, and no guarantee of forgiveness, would you do the same? This was the butterfly effect. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. These timelines don't repeat themselves. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the world not as it is, but as it almost wasn't. Then open them again and ask yourself, what would you sacrifice to change history?